for everyone who's just joined, David is here to do a talk about the philosophy of technology to build your career. So he'll be talking about kind of how technology is more than just building code and how you can really make a career out of it. He'll also be talking about some of the core principles of cloud computing and how to use them to reflect on your work and life, exploring how a career in tech gives us a lens into the future of human systems. For those of you who don't know, David is the technology director and head geek at Not Binary, which is a tech consultancy based in London, I believe.
Yes.
Get in. And he's a hands-on technologist and organization culture maker with experience for tiny startups to UK government. So I'm going to let David take it away. These slides are beautiful. I've said that already, but they are magical. Yeah, David, if you want to take it away.
Good stuff. Thanks, Will. So yeah, as Will said, I guess I've been in all sorts, mostly consultancy, but also startups. I've done a few interesting projects for UK government. I think as I've got older, I've kind of seen how one of the benefits of being in technology is that you get to see technology as a leading indicator for where, I guess, human systems are going, and that's really useful for building a career and for understanding where organisations are going and what jobs might look like in the future. So just I guess a little bit of introduction. So I've been doing this for a good number of years. Came up through programming. I guess I was programming probably when I was about 5 or 6. My dad just sat me down in front of a computer and said, "Hey, here's a fun game." So it just kind of stuck from there. So I've got a particular thing about teams, culture, connection. I think all of the projects that I've done that went well were the ones where the team really got on. And I just started to notice the parallels between good systems in technology and good systems in teams and organizations. So a little bit of a couple of my favorite projects from years past. So quite a few years ago now, we rebuilt the National Rail Inquiry's website. So this is the UK's website for getting train times and information about the rail system. So it's a piece of critical national infrastructure. So it's kind of quite a serious piece of kit. So I got to do both the build and some of the live running and support on that, which was quite an education. And the most favourite of recent years, so I got the chance to rebuild the Office for National Statistics website. So this is the UK government source of open data about national statistics. Another really nice kind of national level piece of infrastructure. So yeah, a couple of fun projects in there. So I guess why, what's this about? Where are we going with this? So not wanting to sound crazy, but I think there's a lovely combination of pragmatism and mysticism in the technology world. And I think being able to hold some of those things in tension and seeing how they inform each other is really, really quite interesting. So this idea that technology, computer science, I always say, is a bit of a misnomer. It really is an art form. If you ask 10 programmers to write the same program, you'll get 10 different programs because, in a sense, the art reflects the artist. So I think there's deeper levels to this that are really interesting to explore and provide some nice metaphors for thinking about life in general, but work in particular. So yeah, I think technology is probably as practical as it is philosophical, and a lot of that for me, on a rational level, comes down to systems thinking. But then I think that goes further. So one of my core beliefs is that cloud is absolutely awesome. So there's just a total difference between what it means to work on a computer and to work in the cloud. Some of the fundamentals are the same, but it's really has transformed what can be done. So when in my early career days, it would take 6 months to get a server running. It would cost thousands to buy. It would cost thousands a year to host it. People would have to look after it and run around in data centers, popping CDs in and out of it. And now, literally seconds and pennies, you can create 1,000 EC2 instances with a click of a button. It's just there is no scale for comparing how far technology's come in the last 20 or so years. So I think that that's really cool on a practical level. But I think if you look a little bit deeper, you start to see that technology it's not agnostic. So I think the idea of ethics in technology, especially in the AI sector, but also this idea that the people who build technology, because it's not purely science, it does embody beliefs and assumptions about the world of the people who are building it. And so as you look at some of these technologies, you start to see the way that people think and the way that how people think is changing. So there's kind of, you can almost sort of track the change or the evolution of the way people think by the technology that they produce. That might sound like a slightly crazy idea, but I think there's something quite interesting there. So I think for me, there's something about technologies that provides a sort of a kind of a radical honesty. So if you've ever heard the phrase, the computer says no, computers they have no airs and graces about them. If they're not working, they're not going to play nice. So it forces you as an individual to think harder and move faster, because essentially you're dealing with something that's very clear, which is something that you don't get in other spheres of life. So I think it's a real advantage in the sort of technology industry, where if you are working with code and you are working with technology, it's going to push you to learn and grow faster than maybe other environments where it's not quite as clear and you don't get that kind of direct feedback. So I just want to pick on what for me, so I did a Google Cloud architect certification last year. And the thing that it really taught me was this idea that cloud is about unbundling the computer. If you take a laptop or a server, you've got hard drives, you've got memory, you've got network cards. It's all kind of together in a box. What cloud does is it disaggregates those into separate pieces. So you get to this sort of really interesting world where the computation, so the code that you're running, is completely ephemeral. So if you're using something like Lambda or Google Cloud Functions, you might have thousands of instances of your code start up within a second, all run in parallel, and then disappear off the face of the earth. So the idea that compute happens and then goes away, just like turning off a computer, the memory disappears. And then you start to realize that it's the storage, the data is the interesting bit. So storage is durable. So that's where the hard problems of computing are, which are basically, how do you back up your data? How do you make sure it's available? How do you make sure it doesn't get lost or compromised? So what you find in cloud is that the cloud providers are taking on those hard problems, turning them into APIs, making them go away. So really, the more and more you use cloud, the more you're only thinking about compute. Now, I guess in this talk, I kind of want to dig a little bit into network. So the idea that computers really only work because there's a network. The revolution in computing only came with the network, and that's about connection and collaboration. I think those for me are the themes that play into kind of careers and work. It's all about connection and collaboration. So this idea that decentralization, again, it reflects the idea of the network. You're decentralizing your computation. Instead of having all the computers in one building, now they're spread around the world. I think the concept of decentralization itself is it's very counter to how most businesses work. Most businesses are very centralized and top down, but increasingly people are starting to understand that there's huge power in decentralization, and it's just this totally different mindset that kind of isn't there in business at the moment. A few companies get it, but not many. So if you think about the web or the world economy, no significantly complex system is centralized. They're all decentralized systems. So take that a little further, think about the human body, think about the natural world. There's no central order to the natural world. It's an interacting system. So I think decentralization is one of these really powerful concepts. If you take that with you into the world of work, you'll start to see it. You'll start to see it appearing, but a lot of companies are there's just this impedance mismatch between the way they think and the way the world, or a complex world, works. So what you're looking for probably is, you're looking for these parallels between systems in life and systems in technology. So you'll find as you start to build technology, there's certain ways that you build systems that are unhealthy, and there's other types of systems that produce these wonderfully, hard to describe, but it just feels like good code when the system is working well. And so you can kind of contrast with, so if I look at organizational systems, they're often these extractive, control-oriented systems where the aim is to get as much as you can out of people. But actually, once you pick up that decentralization idea, you get to this kind of ecological systems mindset that says, actually, you can generate much more than you can take. And I think there's a sort of fundamental disconnect there in the way that work works, but also in the way that we put together technology systems. Apologies if this is all kind of sounding a little bit philosophical, but hopefully I'm hoping that some of this is resonating. So I think I do see this shift in mindset from extraction to generation, where people are realizing that if you collaborate, if you connect, if you work together, you really can generate a lot more power than you can get by forcing people to do work and getting what you can out of them. So if you start to unpack that, it brings you into a place where you start to think about some of the values that talks about. So there's a wonderful chap called Dan Pink. I've known about his work for about 10 years, but I've only finally read his book. I think it's mentioned in the invite there. And he talks a lot about autonomy as this incredibly powerful way of generating energy in people, in work, in things that are being done. So if you've heard of the concept of microservices, these are very autonomous pieces of code that interact and connect with each other. So that's on a kind of technology systems level. But once you start to think of that in terms of people, different people with different expertise, flat teams, connecting, interacting, generating value from the interaction, rather than just kind of having a centralized store of value that you draw from. And I guess also think about open source projects. Again, nobody has to do this stuff. Very few people are paid for it, but a lot of people contribute to it. So there's something about autonomy that has this incredibly motivating effect on us, and it creates something quite beautiful. You can also think about, if you've ever tried to tell a child what to do or ever been told what to do, you'll understand that flip side of autonomy, where it's just, there's something about non-autonomy that is antithetical to the human spirit. So thinking about connection, so you can think about human connection, one of the most powerful forces that we have. But also, if you think about the internet, it was only when we connected computers together that they became this incredibly powerful force that the technology industry has just exploded since whatever it was, early 90s. So without that kind of sense of connection and collaboration, you really can achieve only a fraction of the potential. So I think looking at the ideas of connection and collaboration, both in systems, in technology systems and in human systems, you can see that there's the same resonance there about this idea of when you take multiple autonomous things and put them together, you can get something much larger. Another one I think for me that is one of my favorite concepts, and this it's really not a thing you think of in relation to work, but the idea of play. Play is a place where you're relaxed, you're in flow, you're able to learn, because you're not stressed in an unhealthy way. You can get to a place where you're really challenging yourself and enjoying what it is that you're doing. So occasionally I try to avoid it, but occasionally I do work in the evenings on actual work stuff. But usually I'm playing with the parts that I can't really justify doing during the day. But often, so much learning and so much comes out of that play that it, pretty instantly starts to benefit the day job. And not everybody wants a side project, but for those of us who do enjoy playing with technology, it's a really wonderful way to both enjoy it and add value to your career. Some of the things that maybe not so obvious with play is it is vulnerable. So if you're playing and someone comes to you and says, you're being silly, that it instantly crushes that space within which all that value is happening. So it really needs that kind of that psychological safety, that space, that sense of trust, because without that, it's not possible to play in an environment where you're being scrutinized. If you can't play, you can't generate the value, and if you can't generate the value, the business is going to suffer. So there's this wonderful kind of link between autonomy, value generation, this sort of sense of kind of vulnerability, and vulnerability which needs trust, and trust which needs that human connection. So I hope that is making some kind of resonance, that there's a whole bunch of concepts here that all kind of interact and interconnect. But I think for me, certainly in the way that I'm trying to design the companies that I work for, or future companies that I might build, these are some of the core concepts that I'm looking to build into teams. The space to be connected, to be vulnerable, to feel safe, so that it creates a space to generate a lot of value. That value ultimately ends up in the bottom line. And although it's slightly ironic that companies don't think in this way at the moment, for the most part, but actually it is an incredibly powerful way to run a business and to make money, but also to benefit the people involved in doing that. So there's this sort of, I'm maybe going to go a level deeper here. The idea that if you really want to develop technology, if you want to develop a career, if you want to create value, the practice of developing your own humanity, which is what leads to your ability to build connection, build trust, create vulnerability, create safe spaces. There's a point where you start to realize actually it's the work that you do on yourself to kind of grow and mature as a human being. A lot of that is what creates the space to create value in business, and also just in terms of your own career, your ability to kind of deal with other people and get through what are often kind of just messy situations, and a lot of people just trying to get by and do the best they can, but not always in the most human way. So actually looking at your own kind of human development is probably one of the most fundamental skills, certainly, that I found probably a little later in life than I would have liked. But the more I focus on developing myself, the more I find that reflects in my career. And I use a lot of what I've seen and experienced in building technology to sort of help as a metaphor on that journey. So there are some drawbacks. It does take time. So it's kind of a lifetime practice, but it's more a question of it's something that you do rather than a destination that you get to. So just understanding that is a really fundamental piece to making progress. It's just it's a constant iteration. Software is never finished. There's always something to improve. There's always something new to add into it. So again, that if you're familiar with that process of agile development, iterative development, it's that same metaphor for how you work on yourself. Now, when it comes to organizations, they really do change at human speed, and they're always behind the curve. If you're thinking about this stuff, you will always be frustrated because you'll always be a little bit ahead of where the world can afford to get to. But I also think that's healthy. It's good to be somewhat dissatisfied. And if you do want to be a change agent or someone who's building a forward-thinking business, certainly for myself, I see that some of these concepts, if you can build a business that is a margin ahead of the competition and that has some of these ideas embedded in it, then you've got a competitive edge. You can also create more value than the competition, and that's going to be attractive to customers. So there's this wonderful kind of generative aspect to kind of pushing on these boundaries. The other thing is, it is never a straight road. You're always going to end up in dead ends and despair, and I've been up and down every which corner of life. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. It is the process. The process is messy, but as you go through it, you'll with hindsight, you'll see things starting to come together. But it's not a lot of encouragement at the time when you're having a hard time. But I would encourage you that if it feels messy, that's okay. It's not. That doesn't mean it's bad. You probably will learn a lot of different tools. So I can't even count the number of iterations of what the right thing to do in technology is since I've been working, and it will continue. So if anyone's been in the JavaScript world, you'll know that it changes almost every week. You're constantly going to be learning new tools, and so I think optimizing for learning, being open to that, never really thinking of yourself as an expert, just thinking of yourself as someone with experience who continues to learn. I think it's a very that idea of a growth mindset is quite fundamental. You will learn a lot of things you didn't expect. So in my early days, I really focused on the technology, and I didn't care much for the people around me until someone pointed out that it was never going to go well if other people didn't like me. And that for me was quite a turning point. And there will be those kind of moments of revelation when you realize that something that you really thought was off the table, actually you're going to have to kind of face it and get stuck in. But they're also quite, after the initial kind of oh shit, it's quite a nice process. So also worth saying, I think we are as unique as code. I have never confused two people that I've worked with. They're not the same. There is nothing generic about people. You'll see patterns, you'll see behaviors and traits, but every person has their own story. And it's just really interesting to engage with that and get to know individual people. And actually, there's just so much depth to that. Just as much as exploring a new technology, I certainly find that fascinating. Getting to know a new team and how they interact, and the individuals on that team is also very, very rewarding. So I certainly encourage you to do that as you go through a career. So despite some of the hard stuff, I do think the tide is turning. So it is a slow process. Some of this thinking has been around since the 60s and 70s. I've gone back and read some of the older books. There's a fantastic one called Up the Organization, which is a very irreverent look at how business was in 50s, 60s. And it's just a superb piece of work, and it speaks to a lot of these ideas from a time very, very far in the past, where even then they thought, surely the world of work is going to change. I think the world of work is changing, but it's always much slower than we think. I think there are more organisations around now that really are thinking about this, so it's starting to seep into consciousness. But it's such a shift from the way business behaves to what actually, as Dan Pink would say, the science tells us about motivation and what it is to build something that people enjoy. But I think it's just if you can build an organisation that is on the right side of that dichotomy, you've got so much space to generate value and win, quote unquote, in the world. So anyone who's interested in that, I would definitely recommend that you look into that. And so I guess as a closing thought, this idea that if you take the metaphors that you'll learn through engaging with technology and mix that up with what you learn from your humanity, you'll probably come out with some quite interesting, very unique wisdom that'll be very unique to you. And that's certainly something I encourage all of my teams to do, is develop your own style, find your own path. There's no point copying me. Go and engage with yourself and what it is that kind of turns you on and makes you think. And use all of the things you have available. It's much broader than just technology. And I think that over the course of a career will get you to something that you can be really proud of. So thank you very much. Open floor to questions. I don't know how we're doing for time.
We've got about 15 minutes or so we've got plenty of time for questions. So thank you, David. Really appreciate it. That was really interesting. I'm sure everyone else found that really insightful. Now, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat or unmute your microphones. There's not many people here, so you don't need to worry too much about feeling like you're talking in front of a huge audience. But feel free to ask any questions. If you put them in the chat, I'll read them out for you. We'll just give it a few minutes so people can type something out if they've got a question. I wish Zoom would say someone's typing, because that would really like, sometimes though we had a few of them where people had questions but they were trying to type them out, and we're thinking, oh, okay, that's it, no one's got any questions. Then all of a sudden you get all of these questions that are gonna go.
Good stuff. I mean, it might be worth saying, I guess these, for me, these aren't just ideas. So I've repeatedly tested these things out with each company that I've worked for. So particularly since about 2010, but even before that, just each time picking one person, picking a small team, just testing out what happens if you take apart, look at the assumptions of business that you need to monitor people, or that you need to tell them what to do. So just on small scales, I would just go, well, what if I just say to my someone in my team, and I'll just say, look, you're a grown up, you know what you're doing, go figure it out. And suddenly there was this kind of like, the sort of light comes on, and the kind of the energy that comes back from that. I was so impressed with the on a basic level, the amount of progress and innovation you could get out of people just by getting out of the way. So I just kept experimenting with that, and each time slightly bigger, a bigger team, take it to the level of a small company, each time learn something, take it to another level, and it's gradually sort of snowballed from there and turned into this quite a network of ideas.
So Kat, who's currently based in Toronto, asked, out of all these ideas, which has been the hardest to translate from theory to implementation?
Yes. So the one that comes immediately to mind is autonomy. So I'm, typically I'm either running a team or a business unit. It's very rare that I'm running the whole company. And so I've always got this sort of problem where I'm trying to project autonomy onto my team to get, to give them the space to bring their best. But then being able to communicate that upwards, where often, kind of the layers or, the business above me is still very much in this hierarchical control oriented mindset. It's terrifying, with absolutely good reason from that frame of reference, to not be controlling the people underneath you. So I get a lot of hard questions of, David, you just can't do that. You're simply not allowed to let people do what they want. Whereas from my frame of reference, I'm like, the minute you open that door, all of that energy gets activated and comes on stream. If I start telling them what to do, it all goes out the door, and you maybe end up with 10% of the energy that you could have had. So trying to kind of hold that space and keep those two apart. I've heard it referred to as a heat shield role. You almost have to kind of create this heat shield between the autonomous bubble and the more control-oriented world outside. And that, it's hard, and it's also exhausting. So you can only do that for a certain period of time. So I think until we get to the point where organizations are doing that from the top down, there will always be someone who gets caught in the middle. And that's a really, it is a hard place to be. So don't underestimate the difficulty of that.
Okay, so we've got one more question from Lavish, who is based in India, who asks how to create a decentralized idea.
Yeah, now that's wonderfully interesting. I mean, I think you can already see it. So step back 20 or 30 years, the media was centralized. Now, for better or for worse, we have the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world, where media is often very decentralized. So people like Trump, who will just go directly to Twitter rather than through the layers of control of the media. Not that I want to use that name too loudly, just my personal frame of reference. So I think we already see it quite a lot. So even I'm often working in agile teams where we will get together half a dozen different experts, create a flat team, and they all will kind of come together to create the value in the project. That's very different from a world that I previously worked in, where there would be one project manager who would give instructions to the team and fit them into a plan. So
cool.
Already you're seeing those shifts. They're not complete, but they are there. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think a lot of the kind of SaaS products, a lot of the stuff that we see online now. I don't think even crazy things. When I first set up my first startup, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to run an Exchange server so that we can have email. And my boss at the time said, no, we'll just use G Suite, so Google Mail. And I was like, this is amazing, And there you see this combination of cloud and the sort of change in how things work, where no longer was there a central server, no longer was it something that I had to do, and no longer was it controlled by us as a company. This was this decentralized idea where we could all just log into email and use it, and it would be there for us. So I think I don't know if that speaks to the question, but this idea that if you're looking for kind of business ideas and company ideas, look at some of the stuff that is already going down that decentralized road. I think a lot of it doesn't yet fully embrace autonomy, so people will use the word empowerment rather than autonomy. And empowerment assumes that someone has control over you and they are graciously giving you some power. Autonomy means I don't own you, I don't control you, but I do want to collaborate with you. And that's a long way from where companies are today. So if you can come up with ideas, especially if you're looking for a startup idea or a product idea, ideas that can really hit that autonomy button, I think there's so much power in there. But figuring out how to translate that into something that people use day to day, which at the same time activates their full energy, I think that would be incredibly powerful.
Awesome. Has anyone else got any other questions in the last few minutes? For 5-10 minutes we've got. Sounds like someone just joined. Hello. Hey Rohan, how's it going? Rohan's one of our mentors. Cool. Lavesh says the thanks, that is great. And Kat says thanks.
Good stuff. It's a pleasure. Hopefully some inspiration there and some slightly different ideas to chew over to add some colour to. I know tech is fun in itself, but once you start to mix in some of these other colours, it gets really interesting.
Cool. Give everyone another minute or so to ask any questions they may have. But I just want to thank you again, David, for taking the time to come speak with the fellows. I know I've enjoyed it, and it sounds like the others have really enjoyed it. And once it's on YouTube, probably next week, TM, people will be able to watch it on there. And if we get any questions, I'll send them on to you.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to watching it back on the link.